All right, so I was looking forward to being introduced as the tall, decreasingly blonde member of the audience, but thank you very much for the kind introduction. I hope you guys are properly caffeinated. We're gonna wrap this with two presentations. I'll be presenting. Stuart's got an awesome presentation to cap the day. I wanted to start by thanking the previous presenters. Let's just get some feedback. Has this been a pretty inspiring couple of days for you guys? Yeah, it's been pretty awesome. And thank you to Miles and the whole committee for pulling this together. I've no doubt this is the first event because I certainly have taken just a tremendous amount away from it. So let's talk about, let's see. All right, so 5 goals from this presentation. First, we want to talk about how we leverage LPM to clarify your strategy, to align your work to the key outcomes that matter, all your ducks in a row, and build adaptability into your portfolio management practices. All right, so ultimately, we want to have that flexibility to enable the ultimate business goals we're looking to drive. Last 2, provide options to build modularity into your practice. All right, there's nothing worse than coming in and engaging with a team and you've got one thing on the menu. And finally, want to meet organizations where they're at in their portfolio management practices. But before we dive in, I'm going to take a little bit of an informal poll. From an emotional perspective, it's very touchy-feely. How do you feel when we talk about digging into portfolio management practices? All right, so are you super stoked? Is this like a very exciting thing, topic for everyone? You're like, oh my God, I can't believe they put this at the end of day 2, right? Some people are like, oh, not this stuff again, right? And then there's a number of folks I've had conversations with in the room that are like, holy cow, we need to figure this out now, right? So I want to just be kind of informal about it. Who's on 1, right? All right, so we've got a few people, awesome. 2, like a little snore fest in the back. Okay, I don't see any hands. 3, like, oh gosh, we've been talking about portfolio management forever. And 4, right, we need to fix this. It's one of the really pressing problems in all organizations. So let's dig in. All right, what if we reframed the conversation slightly and borrowed from another field? What if I could give you some hints to optimize the impact of your personal investments, all right? To provide better for your family, to understand where your plan is working and maybe more importantly, where it's not. Maybe fund the next huge vacation for your family. When I think about portfolio management, the thing that I think is interesting, lean portfolio management, the two are surprisingly similar. The focus is really about maximizing the impact of our investments and providing increased transparency and adaptability along the way. All right, let's be clear on what we want to achieve. Let's go after it. Let's have transparency, and let's be able to adapt very rapidly. The good news is that LPM provides a ton of ways to, define your clear North Star for your organization. We've been talking about this a lot over the last few days, but it's very difficult to move the organization along without clarity of vision and purpose, right? Number 2, focusing people on the business outcomes that matter. All too often, we're accused of feature factories. We've got a huge backlog. We're banging stuff out. And oftentimes we're not focused on, is that the right stuff? Is it the best stuff that we should be doing? Are we maximizing our impact? And why are we doing it? 3, make it easier to collaborate and get work done, right? There's a GSD, get stuff done book. At the end of the day, we want to look at complexity in our org and team structures and just make it easier for our people to work together and get it done. 4, we want to take care of our people. I think we had a couple of discussions about burnout earlier today. For me, the largest issue around predictable delivery in organizations today is just too much whip, right? We're taking too much on. We're not saying no. We're not making some of the hard decisions. And some of our people are paying the price. And then that last part, understand where we're on track, where we're not. Where we're not, let's dig in and pivot. All right. So LPM enables clear strategy and funding alignment if you do it right. I'm going to just throw out some key takeaways for each of these sections, and then I'll wrap it up around a cohesive approach to LPM. I think the key to success here is many of you, you're all leaders in your organizations. And the key here is that true north, it's on you, right? As leaders at the top of the house, different levels of organization, interacting with your team, it's critical that you give your people this sense of where we're headed, where we are today, what our customers want, and more importantly, where we're headed tomorrow. And then that strategic intent. So it's not good enough just to say, we're going to do these things and here's how you measure it. The why becomes really, really important as we federate that responsibility and really empower our teams. Second, outcomes-based planning. So let's make sure that we're maniacally focused. As a former New Yorker, this is something that we talked about a lot, right? You want to be maniacally focused on delivering value for your customers, right? There's nothing better, if you're in a retail space, there's nothing better than to go out to a branch or a store and see people buying your stuff and really happy about it. Whether you're an internal service provider or a B2B, B2C, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it should be about how do we relentlessly add more value for our customers every day. And then that second part about empowering your teams. As you adopt outcomes, right, that change, and I'm talking to a bunch of Agilists, so I don't really have to kind of explain this, but that empowerment of, we're going to talk about the what, we're going to talk about the measurement of how we achieve it, but it's up to you guys to figure out the best why, right? The whole Daniel Pink practice, it works. And when you feel it in an organization, it really makes a tremendous difference. Alignment, right? When we get into LPM, one of the things that we start to see pretty quickly is, okay, we can get pretty good OKRs, team by team, portfolio by portfolio, but when you start looking at how aligned are we really, right? How aligned are we within our own teams and then across the organization? So let's make it easier to collaborate, innovate, align, and deliver value to our customers. And org and team complexity, I would say it represents delivery friction, right? When you have a ton of handoffs, and I thought I'd captured that V at the end of that. When you have a ton of handoffs, all right, you're queuing up, there's a lot of complexity. It's really hard to get stuff done, and people get frustrated. So as you start to align your OKRs, if you see lots of horizontal dependencies, that's the trigger to revisit or to visit org and team design for agility. Because as long as you have all those dependencies, it's really hard to align. But a bigger question is, how easy is it to realign if you want to pivot mid-year? Let's jump into capacity, right? This, again, for me, is one of the biggest challenges in that organizations often think, okay, I've got 100 people, maybe 80% of them. Let me throw out that big transformation program. And when you start measuring and have transparency into what people are actually working on, you often find out you might have 20% capacity for your transformation work, right? So you just teed up 4x the amount of work that your people can do, and then you look at them and say, how you feeling? How we doing, right? I don't understand why you guys are stressed out. So you're often putting more work in queue than your teams can possibly do, and then wondering why they're really stressed and burned out, and you have quality challenges, and we need to solve for this. That sense of have a clear understanding of what your people are doing or being asked to deliver before you add to the to-do list is really, really important. 5, there's 10 of these areas, and we'll pull them together. Value-based prioritization, right? I heard some WizGIF conversations around the room. I was pretty impressed. I'm not religious about what your prioritization methods are. They just need to be principle-based and transparent. And the goal here is, let's be really specific about what we're doing, what's going to deliver the most impact, and that second part, which is really hard. What are we deferring? Because there's nothing worse than, hey, we just went through this whole prioritization. It took a long time. Everyone hated it. We now have the final list. And then you go back to your groups and say, yeah, but we're also going to do these 3 or 4 other things because it's important to me, right? All right. 6, capacity and demand. Show of hands. How many people feel like you do a pretty good job of balancing capacity and demand today? Or let me put it this way. Hands up if you feel like there's opportunity for improvement. All right? Great. This is that area again where this is a critical part of taking care of our people. We talk about don't crush your people, right? Don't set them up for failure. But the other side of this that I think gets lost is innovation is almost impossible when you have too much whip, right? And you have 3, 4x of work in queue. There's never enough time to take a step back, and have that kind of how might we discussion and really be creative. So balancing capacity and demand feels like kind of a technical issue, or in some groups can view it as, it's a lot of work to get this right, it's real administrative, but it's critical to taking care of your people and to enable innovation across your organization. 3 more. Quarterly planning. How many of you guys have adopted or have piloted quarterly planning, rolling quarterly planning in your organization? Can I see a show of hands? Yeah? Some folks are working with SAFE, and that's a big part of the methodology. But at the end of the day, annual planning sucks, right? I want to show, does anybody like annual planning, right? I ran like corporate technology for AIG, the business management group for them at one point. It was a $600 or $700 million budget. And about a quarter of my life every year, really like 6 months, but there was a quarter where it was just the nail through my finger, right? And so at some point, let's have this discussion about how do we move from annual planning to a rolling quarterly planning that is more efficient, is a little more focused. And at the end of the day, we want to go from being deck aligned to delivery aligned. I want to take a second and explain what I mean by that. I think all too often, in particularly large complex organizations, when we talk about prioritization and what's a good idea, and we talk about strategy, we all view a bunch of PowerPoints, right? And we look at it and say, yeah, that's a good idea. Digital transformation sounds great. Cloud, that sounds good. I'd like some cloud, right? DevOps sounds good. We're still, we're not going to stop rolling out any new products, and we have to refactor our code and all of that type of stuff. It all sounds great at the aggregate, right? But being able to drill down on an annual basis of what that really means from an interdependency perspective, a sequencing perspective, and like what it really takes to get it done. I think what we're seeing is that on a quarterly or on an annual basis, it's just impossible. It's too big. As you move to quarterly planning, I really can't tell you what I'm going to do 9 months from now, but I probably can give you a pretty good idea in 90 days, all right? So the important thing, as you think about this, is let's move to a process that works better, but as we do it, and you start talking to people about it, be really careful about how you message it. Because there's nothing worse than going into a group and saying, hey, you know that process that you hate every year, it just sucks, you dread it? Let's do it quarterly now, right? Awesome. Or the process that takes like 5 or 6 months to do, yeah, let's do it every 3 months, all right? So it's super valuable, but you got to be careful about how you approach it. Transparency, right? I had a couple of conversations with folks about reporting. And reporting is great if you get it right and if it adds value. If you don't get it right, it turns into this administrative overhead that just eats you up, particularly for folks in kind of a PMO analysis and reporting role. So what you want to think about here is you want to create the environment where risks and issues flow really smoothly, right? One of the things I appreciate about JPMorgan Chase, and not an easy organization to work in, but there was a culture there. It's your job as a leader and as someone in a particularly in a transformation space, a big part of your job is to tell us where we're not getting it right early, while there's still time to engage and make sure that we're addressing it before it becomes a big issue. And then that step, I love the conversations around leadership agility, around HR. Let's start evaluating our leaders on their ability to remove those obstacles, right? It's not about how did you look and were you popular and all that stuff. And it's also not how far did you push your people. It's how effective were you at how effective were you as a gardener this year, right? Were you pulling the weeds that were coming up? Were you making sure that your people had everything they needed to be successful, all right? Bit of a transition, but super important. 2 more. Measurement and governance, all right? So make sure that you're measuring what's working and what's not to enable what I would call courageous agility, right? So if you have good metrics, it's much easier for people to challenge when something's not right, right? It's not about, hey, in my opinion, this just doesn't feel right. It's about, hey, from a burn-up perspective, we're not on target. We need to take a different approach, right? And then the last one around governance, focus on creating clear guardrails. Now, this isn't easy to do. It takes a lot of thought. It's going to vary per group, per culture. But if you can get clear guardrails right, it enables you, or empowers your teams, and gives them a sense of, hey, within these kind of boundaries, it's wide open. We can do what we'd like to do. And you kind of engage on an exception-only basis. It's really empowering. And then last, so I don't know if this translates real well, but I have a mission, I have a goal in life to transition the PMO from being a 4-letter word. Because for many years, as I led PMOs, there were adjectives in front of my office all the time. We have to deal with that fill in the blank PMO group, right? So here's the challenge, right? Let's move the PMO to an LPMG, a lean portfolio management group, where you're focusing on value, right? So that group is really empowered to question vision, question intent. You coordinate and really enable the LPM process. You provide the governance and clarity. So you're enabling the whole organization to deliver value in a meaningful way. Very different focus than some of the kind of process oriented PMOs that many of us have spent time in. So some kind of lessons learned, and then we'll wrap up with a little Q&A. Oh, I'm sorry. Pulling it all together. So we can come back and look at this, but this is a big part of my practice in meeting organizations where they're at. So I started by engaging groups around OKRs and had, for me, it was a high beta play, right? Sometimes it worked really well. Other times people were like, yes, no way, we're not doing that. So what I wanted to do with all of my clients is say, okay, let's have the discussion. What's the nail in your finger today, right? What's the compelling need? Because around these areas, any improvements are going to move things forward, right? And I want to understand where the energy and the interest is in the organization, and maybe some quick wins, which we'll talk about in a second. Because as you engage people on those, you can get progress and traction on the overall model. So first lesson, look, LPM is not easy. Portfolio management is not easy, but it's super impactful when you get it right, and it's absolutely a critical enabler for business agility. 2, figure out where those quick wins are. There usually are some. I worked with a big market data shop a couple of months ago, and everyone, the senior person came in, they weren't very interested in OKRs, so I started with vision. Simple question, hey, how clear is your vision? Senior guy was in the back, he's like, yeah, it was totally clear, right? And half the people in the room were like, oh, no, right? So we solved that in 48 hours, right? We did a couple of workshops, did some exercises, got some feedback, went away, met with the leadership team before the workshop the next day, and by the end of day 2, we had a clear strategy, clear vision with thematic focuses that then fed their OKR process. So figure out what those quick wins are and capture them. Be really clear about what you can move quickly and where you need to plant a seed. So for me, OKRs are definitely on the seed side. Some of the LPM team cadences and transitioning the PMO in their role sometimes is a little bit of a journey. So plant the seed, expose people to the concepts, and while you're making those quick wins and getting traction, believe me, they will start pulling. 4, got to be flexible. And I'm not going to do a warrior 3 pose up here and embarrass myself, but it's all about, this has to be very bespoke for your culture, your markets, and what's going to work for you. It's going to really depend. So as you engage, your ability to be flexible, zero in on what's going to add value, and then bubble it back up to a cohesive solution is where you can really have a transformative impact on your organization. And last one. I said it before, can't say it enough. It's really important in this space to meet organizations where they are. There is a bit of portfolio management fatigue in organizations. And I have to say, I've had conversations with people around the world that are like, yeah, I just don't use the term PMO anymore. I don't use the word portfolio or the term portfolio management, right? But the fact is, we all know the job still needs to be done. It needs to be done in new, more flexible, and different ways, which means you have to meet your organization where you are by building flexibility into your approach, giving people options, sensing and adapting, but really sensing where there's energy, add value, and I promise you that in the last 4 days, I've had 5 companies reach out to me based on workshops that I did in Q4. And came in a couple of days, planted the seed. Now all of a sudden they've been sitting with it for 3 or 4 months. And like, yeah, one's running $1 billion transformation program. Like, we're getting killed on reporting. How do you feel about coming in for about 6 weeks to Texas? And I said, well, I've got an option for Chicago in February or San Antonio. I think you're it, right? It's about a 70 degrees difference for people who aren't familiar with the two. So that's it.